Good afternoon, everyone. This is Mike O'Malley here with the Hurricane Outlook and discussion for June 8th, 2021, recorded on 1:45 p.m. Eastern Time. We have a lot to talk about today, including the potential for a tropical depression or storm to be forming in the Caribbean over the next several days. So let's go ahead and jump straight into everything. Taking a wide look across the tropical Atlantic this afternoon, notice that strong upper level winds are cutting across the Caribbean at this time, and most of the main development region for that matter. A big plume of Saharan air that is coming off of the coast of Africa, stretching all the way out now to near Barbados and the Lesser Antilles. And this will be gradually moving towards the west over the next several days, and eventually, as it gets pumped around this big Bermuda high, it will reach the United States within the next few days over here towards the Bahamas and Florida, even Cuba. So just something to kind of keep in mind over the next several days, that we will have some of that Saharan air make its way all the way across to the Atlantic Basin. This is very usual for this time of the year. Again, the biggest Saharan air outbreaks are typically in July, the latter half of June into July, and then they start to calm down by August and certainly by September, then by the peak of the Atlantic hurricane season. But we will be watching this whole area over the next several days as a broad trough of low pressure is expected to develop with a Central American gyre. And this area of broad cyclonic turning in the atmosphere could spawn a tropical cyclone in either the Eastern Pacific or the Atlantic Basin. It seems like that we are starting to kind of capture more of the idea that we'll have a system develop in the Eastern Pacific first. That energy will then cross over into the southwestern Gulf of Mexico, and that is when we could have to deal with something then by next week potentially. So we'll talk about that here in just a moment. Taking a look at the sea surface temperature anomaly maps, last updated as of yesterday, June 7th. Again, not really seeing much of a change. I do want to kind of point a couple of things out at the moment. So right now, this is the basically the Nino 3-4 region, which is this area right in through here. This is the Nino 3-4 region. And this is kind of the area where we look towards for determining El Nino or La Nina conditions. Now, there has been some kind of talkings about how this area is warming up. Now, yes, it is true that this area is warming up. However, what we notice is that there's a lack of significant warmth. What we have here is a lot of cool waters south of the Nino 3-4 region. And all of this is mainly because we have a lot of easterly winds that will be cutting across this area over the next several weeks. We have been under a regime of westerly wind bursts, which have subsequently warmed this area and basically canceled out the La Nina. Notice, though, what we're dealing with here. This is basically a very cool area off the coast of California and the Baja Peninsula. And again, this kind of points towards a La Nina type background. The atmosphere is still very much in a La Nina type background, and we typically see cool waters out here when we are associated with La Nina conditions. And because of that, we just don't have a lot of upward moving air over the Eastern Pacific Basin as a whole. We just don't have that. So this is basically canceled out. And as for the Atlantic Basin, we don't really have a lot of cool waters. And again, there's kind of been some talkings about maybe some cooler temperatures. Yes, we're off the coast of Africa here. We do notice that, yes, this area is a little bit cooler than the long-term average, maybe a degree, but it's not over this whole entire area. You don't see this whole entire area carved out with blue. And just like 2018, we saw the main development region in 2018 at its all-time coolest, and then it significantly warmed by the time of the peak season. What my point is here that this is not going to be another 2013 repeat. We're not going to see, something like that happen. This will warm with time as the West African monsoon, the WAM, the West African monsoon, intensifies. And because of it intensifying during, closer towards the peak of the season, this area will warm. So I'm not really worried about that. And then, of course, the Gulf of Mexico, generally running above the long-term average in most spots. And now this is interesting. Off the coast here of the Carolinas and off the Mid-Atlantic and Northeast, out there, temperatures are running well above the long-term average, and this could help to strengthen a Bermuda high out in this region, which again would prevent a lot of turning away And with the intertropical convergence zone being suppressed, and we kind of see that now here, the intertropical convergence zone is fairly suppressed here at very low latitudes. And while this will move northward, this has some interesting effects that we noticed how last year we had tropical waves that were coming off about the latitude of the Cabo Verde Islands. And because of that, once they got out here, they started to kind of turn and sneak their way up here and prevented them, from getting out, somewhere like that. This year, it's a bit different. We have a suppressed intertropical convergence zone, and we have tropical waves that come off later, so it keeps it in the warmer waters. So this is becoming a little bit less of a player, and we're starting to see this area become a player more so going forward in time. Now, looking at actual sea surface temperatures here for the Gulf of Mexico and parts of the Caribbean, again, we notice that this plume of 28 degrees Celsius waters begins to stretch now northward. It's now making its way north of 27 north, and that is pretty good. Again, that's definitely showing signs that this warm pool, this warm eddy, is trying to now abate northward and lift northward, and this cooler water here is beginning to retreat. Now, there is still some cool waters. You do notice that, yeah, we do still have some cooler waters, especially up there near the Florida Panhandle, but for the most part, again, these waters are easily mixable. Off the coast of the Florida Peninsula here, water temperatures running in some cases about 90 degrees there off of clear water, but the majority running about 28 to 29 Celsius. Here's a pocket of 29 Celsius there. So we're definitely warming up in the Bay of Campeche. Now, keep in mind, this is the area that we're going to have to watch really carefully over the next several days and through the next week. This is where I think development chances will be the highest, and water temperatures in this area are fairly high. And again, anything coming out of this region will definitely have some decent water temperatures to work with. For reference here, this is 27 Celsius out and through here, so we're not really seeing a lot of very cool waters until we start to get closer towards the shelf waters there. So not really too much of a concern, but this is definitely the area that I'd be watching over the next several days for the potential for development, and we'll talk about that here in just a moment. Looking at the upper ocean heat content values, last updated as of this morning, basically what we're looking at here is how far down does the 26-degree isotherm go, which is about 80 degrees Fahrenheit. And basically what this is measuring as well is, of course, as hurricanes move over water, they upwell cool water. If you have very high upper ocean heat content, which is what the upper end of the scale is showing, anywhere from the lighter blue colors onwards towards the right of the scale is some pretty decent and very high upper ocean heat content, especially once you start getting into the oranges and the reds. As a tropical cyclone goes over this area, instead of kind of basically upwelling cooler water, it only upwells warmer water. And because of that, this is something that's very important for the hurricane season. Now, I want to focus on the main development region real quick. So this is typically where we had tropical waves coming off last year. You notice that this year, there's virtually zero upper ocean heat content in here. But where tropical waves are coming off this year, this is about 10 north. And I'm trying to draw it as straight as I can, but this is roughly about 10 north. And if tropical waves are coming off at about 10 north, anywhere between, 5 to 10 north, this would be about 5 north right here. They are, in this area of higher upper ocean heat content. Now, yes, this area will move northward as we progress through the next several months. It's only June 8th. But, if they're coming off at, 10 to 15 north, they're going to have a better chance to not deal with a lot of the Saharan air. Again, you can kind of see that, there is some pretty good moisture down here, and Saharan air is all up to the north of this. So this is one thing that we'll be monitoring over the next several months. But focusing on the Western Caribbean and the Southwestern Atlantic Basin, you do notice that there is some pretty decent upper ocean heat content down here near, obviously, the Yucatan and certainly near Jamaica and Cuba. And there is this warm eddy right here with 28 to 29 Celsius waters, and there is some fairly decent upper ocean heat content in that environment. And we do notice that there is some upper ocean heat content starting to build out here in the Southwestern Atlantic, where water temperatures are running 28 to 30 Celsius, especially right near the coast here of the Yucatan Peninsula. So with this being said, this is going to be the prime area, I think, for development over the next week or two. And we'll talk about why that's going to be the reasoning here in a moment. Now, the official outlook from the National Hurricane Center, as of the 11 a.m. Update from the National Hurricane Center for the Eastern Pacific, this area here has a 40% chance of developing into a tropical cyclone over the next 5 days. And this is likely going to be the primary area for development. And then we might see an area decide to cross over, some energy left over cross into the southwestern Atlantic. And conversely, in the Eastern Pacific Basin, there is a 20% chance of development over the next 5 days for an area of low pressure that is expected to develop near the coast of Honduras in Central America. But this is likely to continue moving into Central America and not really pose a threat for development. Now, with that being said, this is going to be a very heavy rainfall producer for portions of Central America, including Belize and the Yucatan Peninsula, Honduras and Nicaragua, even Costa Rica and Panama. They're going to be experiencing very heavy rainfall, and that can cause mudslides, flash flooding, and unfortunately loss of life. So just because we won't be seeing a tropical depression or storm that will likely form in this area, at least in the Caribbean, there will still be some very heavy rainfall. Now, development chances, I think, will probably start increasing over the Gulf of Mexico over the next several days, and we'll talk about that here now. So this is the 12Z GFS forecast, the 12Z run valid for 2 p.m. this afternoon. And this is the 850 millibar vorticity, the spin in the atmosphere about 5,000 feet off the ground. This is valid as of 2 p.m. this afternoon. So we'll just move this out to about 8 p.m. tomorrow, or I'm sorry, not 8 p.m. tomorrow, but 8 p.m. Yeah, 8 p.m. tomorrow. And what we're looking here is we actually have a fairly big Bermuda Azores high. This is the Azore Islands. That's Bermuda right there, Canary Islands, and the Cabo Verde, just to get your bearing straight. Now, what's interesting is we go back to yesterday's run. The GFS did not want to develop this area down here in the Eastern Pacific Basin at all. Now, the GFS has kind of flopped here on the 12Z run, and it's trying to develop this area into a weak depression or storm by the time we get into Friday. And what we talked about previous days is that the GFS model was developing a tropical cyclone by Friday. So the GFS is now once again flopped back onto this idea. But again, it's one run, and we're not seeing any consistency. And the Euro doesn't have it. Some of the ensembles do. We'll talk about that here in a moment. But what we notice is that, yes, we do have an area of vorticity that is expected to develop down here in the parts of the Eastern Pacific Basin. Now, what we also do see is that you notice this little spin out here. This is that area of low pressure in the southwestern Caribbean. This will be running into Central America, and this is likely to not develop. But if we move this far out enough in time, you'll start to notice where we get areas of consolidated vorticity near Mexico here on the Eastern Pacific side, and just off the tip of the Yucatan Peninsula here in the basically in the southwestern Atlantic in the Bay of Campeche, and that eventually does develop into a tropical cyclone here by Friday of next week. Now, what this tells me is that there is some potential, and the modeling has been somewhat consistent on this idea over the last several days. Now, does this make sense? Well, let's look here at the 700 to 400 millibar relative humidity product, and this is basically showing in the green here. This is basically all your moist air, and conversely, the browns here, this is basically dry air aloft. And what we notice is that, yes, we do see that there will be a lot of moisture associated in this area. We actually get a front to kind of come down here, a very weak frontal boundary to kind of come down across Florida in the southeast. And this kind of helps to lift a system northward as the more favorable pattern begins to evolve. And this does develop into a bona fide tropical cyclone here in the Gulf of Mexico by Saturday of next week. Now, will that happen? I don't know. Could Tropical Storm Bill be on the horizon? I don't know that answer, and no one does for that matter. But we can look at the clues here. Let's look at the GFS mean sea level pressure anomalies here, and let's kind of look at this kind of clue by clue. So this is the mean sea level pressure anomalies, departures from average. What we notice is that we have a fairly stout Bermuda high right now that is sitting across most of the region. which has kind of been pumping a lot of deep tropical moisture around and up across into portions of Arkansas and parts of the Midwest, where they are seeing some major flash flooding problems, and certainly out across portions of the Northeast where they have had consistent severe weather over the last several days. So if we move this forward in time, what we'll end up kind of noticing here is that this is by day 5 in this forecast. Now, there is a couple of things that I want to point out here. The GFS forecast, for what it's worth, has been developing a tropical cyclone off the tip of the southeast coast here by Monday. And we're not too far out from that. This is less than a week away. Now, whether or not this happens, again, it remains to be seen, but there is a pre-existing disturbance that is sitting out right now. There's kind of this pre-existing disturbance right here that's sitting out across portions of the Midwest. This will eventually kind of move its way southward and may end up trying to develop out here, and some of the modeling and ensembles have kind of looked at that area. Now, if anything, this will probably be heading on out to sea, so I wouldn't expect it to be much of a land threat, but we'll be monitoring over the next several days for what it could bring. So again, the ensembles are picking up on that area for sure, but we notice what we're really looking at is after next week, really after this week, really, we notice that we get a large area of below the normal pressures out across the Caribbean and the southwestern Gulf of Mexico. And this kind of leads me to believe that there will be the potential for a system somewhere within that vicinity over the next several weeks. Now, the ensemble means off the 12Z GFS. We'll kind of back this up to day 5, first of all. Now, we notice that, yes, there is an area of low pressure out here across the Caribbean. And this is what the National Hurricane Center is highlighting at the moment. But it's not a very deep area. It's not a very strong area. We notice that there's actually a lot more ensemble support down here across the eastern Pacific side for a cyclone to be developing and then its remnant energy to move into the Gulf of Mexico. And we kind of see that. Now, the GFS still does have some of these, runs that develop a tropical cyclone out here in the Caribbean side and move its way out here. But I think the greater potential, honestly, would be for a cyclone to develop somewhere in this vicinity and move its way northward through there. Now, where it could go, I don't know. But if a system forms in the Gulf of Mexico, it's usually going to impact land. But what strength, where at, I don't know that answer, nor does anyone. And I want to make that very clear right now that any, Joe Schmo on YouTube or Twitter or whatever can say major hurricane in the Gulf of Mexico in a few days, and trust me, I've already seen that. But that doesn't mean that something is going to happen. What we do know is that, yes, there is that potential there, that something could be there by next week, by next Thursday into Friday, potentially sooner. Will that happen? I don't know. Let's look at the 0Z Euro model. And this is the 0Z deterministic model of the Euro, and the Euro absolutely shows nothing in the Gulf of Mexico through 0Z Friday. It actually does show, though, a tropical cyclone developing near Mexico on the eastern Pacific side. Now, there is still ensemble support. We'll look at the 0Z ensembles from the Euro, and the Euro does still have plenty of ensembles that do develop a tropical cyclone, first of all, in the eastern Pacific basin. Kind of forgot my words for a minute. And then they kind of move into the Gulf of Mexico here. And again, some members here stronger, some members weaker. Will that happen? I don't know. There's not really a tremendous amount of answers that we have right now. But what we do know is that there will be an upcoming favorable pattern. And what we can actually look for here is the 200 millibar wind off the GFS. And what's kind of interesting to note here is, again, we'll go back to day 5. So what we notice here is by day 5, we have an upper level anticyclone mainly centered over where? The eastern Pacific. That is where a tropical cyclone is likely to develop somewhere within that vicinity. Why? Because we have high moisture and we have basically ample moisture and low vertical wind shear. We just have too much shear developing out across the Caribbean. We notice that there's actually a trough that's digging in across here, and that's what's promoting some of that shear. And this upper level anticyclone is only increasing that shear out across the Caribbean. So there's not really much of a potential for something to actually develop when you have very high shear in the magnitudes of over 30 to 40 knots. It's just not happening. But this support is there for Caribbean or for basically Southwestern Atlantic development, but you can even see here that, there's still a lot of shear across this area. So right now, we'll just have to see what happens. Again, nothing is a guarantee, but we will have to watch and wait. The signals are there that there is an upcoming window of favorability across the Atlantic Basin as a whole, and maybe it is going to start to be time here. We can kind of see that there will maybe be a window of favorability sometime by late June for the upcoming pattern switch for the main development region. Will that happen? I don't know, but we'll just have to wait and see. All right. So Tropical Storm Bill may be a thing, may not be a thing. We'll just have to kind of wait and see. But again, it's never too early to get your preparedness plans on their way. All right. Well, that being said, I hope you all have a great rest of your afternoon, evening. Of course, I am Michael O'Malley. I'll talk to you guys again some more tomorrow.